So this is my conversation with Chris Sicat, who you'll hear when he speaks. I felt that he had not just a deep understanding of art and the process of creating art, but also a really deep intuition about it. Some of the topics that we cover were things like what it means to observe or to see without intent, so that we get past what we think we're supposed to see and actually see what's before our eyes. The nature and purpose of collaboration and what it means to create collectively with others. How a willingness to fail is a greater opportunity than succeeding. I really appreciated his perspectives, not just as an artist, but as a facilitator. He is a musician. He is a museum exhibit designer. And at heart, he is a poet and a dancer. So here's my conversation with Chris. I am really looking forward to speaking with you. And one of the interesting things, I'm sure there are many, but one of the interesting things is that you are a multidisciplinary. I don't want to label it, but you create many different forms of art and different media. And I always find that fascinating because you're making choices about what medium do you want to use for what purpose and why. And I just think that's so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting that we often try to label ourselves as a painter or sculptor, and I actually find it kind of ambitious to even state that. So maybe in my mind, it's easier not to be defined as such, and it opens up the ability to be creative, more creative.
So let's take a step back, and maybe you can just talk to me a bit about when you first started making art and what it meant to you.
Great. How about a little story first? As it's raining here in California, it reminded me of a time when I was very young, and it had rained the night before. It was thunder and lightning. And then the next morning, I got out in front of the house and I started doing something that I did for the very first time. It was actually remembering. And so here I am looking at the house. I started drawing the triangle roof and the square house with the two windows. It really was the first time I actually maybe was using my eyes. And so next to me was my dad. And so I looked up at him, and that was probably the first time I ever saw him. And then as I continued back into the drawing, poetically enough, my mother comes out of the window, and I started drawing her too. And so the visual arts probably started there with literally a house drawn in the sand. And through the years, I was just drawing all the time, just imagining what it would be, like to draw things that I saw, what I was observing, because I think it did make me more aware.
I'm going to make the very briefest of comments from my very briefest of interactions with drawing. But I remember one of the biggest shifts was not to draw what you think something is or what you think you see, to really kind of like short circuit that part and just try to draw what you see.
Yes.
It's a big moment when you make that shift.
And that is interesting as we talk more about my role as an educator. I teach life drawing. And so one of the challenges is always having students, and even myself, draw what you see before you verbatim, like really what is in front of you. And without thinking what a portrait ought to look like or thinking how this body is supposed to look like, and really exercise and train your eyes to see. So that's actually a real challenge. And then, of course, the technical aspect of translating it on paper is a whole nother thing too. It's just a whole nother thing. But the act of observing, that's hard. It's a challenge because we think, we conceptualize. And so what's before you maybe has no intention. So therefore, when you start to create intention in your drawings, there might have been something amiss. And so that's the challenge for artists and students, and for people too, to observe and see without intention.
Can I ask you more about what you mean by that? Because, like, as soon as you said that, in my mind, I thought, well, but I'm intending to draw a picture of X. So, like, how do I come to it without it? Because if I come to it without an intention, what am I doing? Like, why am I even looking?
Right. Exactly. And so I think part of it is this idea of the ideals is often something that we get challenged with. So what is the ideal proportion or the ideal look or style? And so we get caught up in that. And in many ways, we're probably educated and molded in seeing that's the way a drawing is supposed to look like, or a figure is supposed to look like. And so the challenge is to remove yourself from those intentions and to start first with the task of being aware and seeing what's before you. And then hopefully from there, that is going to get shared onto the paper. And when I mean shared, get drawn to the paper, you become a facilitator of that. And versus one who is starting to dictate. When I started as an artist, I was drawing, and I went and saw an exhibition at the museum where the museum's floor was dug up. Like the whole thing was dug up. It's a work by the artist Chris Burden, and it's called Exposing the Museum's Foundation. And I thought it was very poetic. And so I had this idea of what art is, but then all of a sudden I come into this museum, this exhibition, and this experience. And it was that same feeling of that house that I do in the sand. It's like being aware of my surrounding, my awareness of my own presence. It was really, really beautiful. That for me was a shift and change of what I thought what art is, and actually seeing and experiencing it. So working with students, I would like for them to look at the model, experience observing, and then drawing from that experience versus what you would think a model drawing, figure drawing looks like. And you look at historical art movements from Dada to Fluxus, they really were talking about process and experiences, and objects was almost secondary. But the experience of seeing and observing and even participating in the art is a big shift. And once you're aware, then hopefully you'll see art much more encompassing and varied. I also work as an exhibition designer. Some of the jobs that we do is to show the diversity of art, that the range of diverse art making, art experiences is very similar to our own selves and to the diversity of people.
There's a lot of different directions we could go from here.
Yeah, your choice. Your choice. I'm just sharing with you some thoughts.
Well, so, I started with the idea of you as a multidisciplinary artist whose practice involves, different media to create different kinds of works. And then when I hear you speak about being a facilitator as well and an exhibit designer as well, I think that brings you a very broad perspective on the practice of art outside of even being an artist. So, what do you see as what your work as a facilitator and as an exhibit designer, how did those inform your practice as an artist?
So there were moments where I came from this education of being an artist, creating your own original artwork. But I was also influenced by deconstructing those ideas too, like de-objectifying, break the objects. And so the idea that I am an originator of this work, or only I can make this work, it's almost like the artist's motif, right? Only Picasso could paint like that, or only Matisse could paint like that. And so I said, well, how do I break even that? How do I like deconstruct that idea? Can other people make my art too? Would that be helpful? Would that be encouraging? Some of the works that I've done, I have been working with redwood logs and redwood slabs, and I've been hand coloring them with a pencil, for example, one line at a time. If you could imagine like a log completely covered in graphite, and it looks like this metallic sculpture, but it really is very natural. It's graphite, charcoal compressed on this wood. I mean, I do sculpt the wood. I do have formal education in composition and balance that comes into play. But at the same token, I am doing a task that anyone can do, which is drawing a line on a piece of wood. So for me, I kept thinking like, well, yes, I do it. As a professional artist, I actually do have a gallery who shows my work, and these are what I do. I kept thinking, well, anyone could do this, that anybody can. And I kept thinking about it, I'm like, yes, they can. And I'm not going to discourage it. And I would even say, well, yeah, if you see a tree branch and you have a pencil, go ahead and start coloring that tree branch. I think there's something actually very empowering when I don't own that work. That now I was sharing an experience that they can have. When I do the work, it is this process based, and it breaks time, it deconstructs time. So yeah, people can definitely do the work that I do.
Oh, Chris, I don't like that idea at all.
And so far, no one has been able to take up on it. I haven't seen anybody coloring redwood logs with the pencil. Like, people, come on. There's galleries who will sell that stuff, There are experiences that you can have with doing that. I will not stop you. If anything, I will encourage you and see what comes out of it. And what maybe will come out of it is something that you yourself may create, something very different. A lot of people draw with a charcoal stick and they draw a figure. A lot of people do. And yet they find their own ways. It's interesting. The most beautiful sculptures, the most organic pieces of wood are the woods that they can't make a 2x4. There's something that gets learned through like just a simple task of drawing a line on a piece of wood, drawing a line in the sand. Yeah.
I'm curious to ask you because it was Gary who suggested that I speak with you, and I was very appreciative of that. And so thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks to him, and thanks to you for agreeing to it. He wrote me and he said, make sure to ask him about his performance piece. It's really cool. I want to make a little shift from the redwood trees to a different form of practice in this performance.
Yes. And I will also be very conscientious that it's not very different in many ways. Performance. The act of actually coloring a log with a pencil is a performative act. It's a performance. It's interesting that when I do create performance art, and I do direct theater, very linear theater performances, working with students, doing readings. So yeah, one of the things when I think about performance art is that I was educated by a lot of the artists who were doing the work in the 70s and 80s, performance art as a medium in itself. The video taping of the performance in their studios was the painting, for example. And for me, as a performer, as a musician, I've always said, how do I put these all together? Oftentimes I look at music and dance as a form of art that makes sense. They go together. The visual arts are always going to be a part of performance art. I will often write narratives or scripts. In the early stages, it was just myself doing the performance art, and then they became a little bit more elaborate. I've had friends who will, like Gary is our friend who did this performance where I had two nude wrestlers going at each other while a Xerox machine was going on in the background. This was grad school, and I was drawing the figure all the time. So I said, oh, this kind of makes sense. Yeah, it's a Xerox machine going in the background with the lights, and then these two figures like wrestling with each other. And then we had somebody singing an opera song, so an aria. So I thought that kind of made sense because that was my experience of drawing the figures every day in grad school and being aware of like what's happening around me. So that's how the performances get written, and then it's a matter of collaboration. And then that's another thing that I think as an artist is collaborate. The idea that other people are part of it is really important, and that we're sharing ideas. What are you also going through? Does this aria make sense for this performance? And they'll bring other elements too. That always, again, is the collaboration, which surprises me. It does look like performance art, but it really is more sharing of our experiences. And that's what we see in dance. Many cultural dances, they're stories, they're narrative stories of what people are going through. And often it's not an individual, but it's actually a group. Cultural dance is a performance in itself. I mean, how they move, how we move together, how we move in marches, in dances, and in protests. Those are our performances.
So from what you just said, and I did go a step back to when you were talking about collaboration, and I maybe it is a false distinction, but I was sort of thinking, well, there's collaboration, and I know that a little bit from my work. And what it usually means is I do my piece, you do your piece, they do their piece, we give each other feedback, and we try to make it work together. That's great. But when you talk about marches or protests, for example, for me, that's almost like more, it's on another level because it's co-creating, because it's improvised, it's not planned. And so it's somehow being generated as a group, and it's not just individuals putting their pieces in and kind of glomming it together. So do you see those as quite different things?
Not necessarily. It's not so definitive. And that's where I look at art in a very broader sense. I don't know, it was 5 or 6 years ago, we had the Ice Bucket Challenge, the ALS challenge, video performances. They're video art of people doing this performance. They don't have MFAs, but they were doing something collectively together, sharing something, sharing information, sharing experiences. To me, that was a really beautiful act. That in itself is performance art. It may not be in an art institution. It may be in suburbia. It may even be in the digital area. But the act, the performance of it, I thought it was very powerful. And to me, art can be very powerful as a social instigator and also for social awareness.
It's really interesting speaking with you because you bring up so many different things that my brain is also doing like a bit of ping pong. I'm like, oh, and there's that, there's that, and there's that.
Yeah, maybe it is a challenge to be an undefined artist. Because I could tell you about charcoal drawings and like what materials to use.
Don't change a thing. This is very dynamic. I love it. It's just because it's sparking. It's so much as sparking. But if I ask you this broad range of work that you do, and obviously all these other interests, and now you've said that you're a musician too, and then the dance, and like there's just so many components to what you do. What do you think you reveal about yourself through those works? And I don't know, maybe certain things tend to come out in performance pieces, and maybe different things come out through drawing. I have no idea, but try not to be so definitive because I can be very so, but open question. What do you think you reveal about yourself through your work as an artist?
I feel as a professional artist, you definitely define yourself. You can define your brand. You can define your identity as a professional artist, right? And so I think that's the work that I do. You're talking to a professional artist because this is the work that I've embraced and maybe even being recognized for. And I've had many examples in our history that are doing very similar ways, just very similar things, that they were all over the place. And when I mean all over the place, they were being themselves. How can I be myself? Yeah, I'm doing the best that I can. I really am. And I couldn't be just a painter. And even being a painter is not as simple as that sounds. By any means am I reducing a painter, but I think it does allow for me to define myself as an artist, define who I am in the work that I do. I play music, I draw, I paint, and really a creator is something that I'm trying to not limit any definitions of mediums. Who knows? Maybe I'm just a poet. Though I will say, and I'm only going to share this because I'm being very vulnerable now, that one of my dreams was to be this modern dancer, like to be like a dancer. Like, could you imagine if you could just dance for 100 hours a week? That's your job. I mean, God, how beautiful! I thought that would be the dream job. And then now I've defined dance, and I believe I've become a dancer in my own ways of defining dance. And so I think that's how I will then start to look at the way I would define making art, maybe even the way I would define my own life. If I could do that, hopefully I could share that with others around me, that they too can define their own life in their own ways. Being vulnerable, being able to share is being empathetic, showing empathy. Honestly, that's one of the hardest things to do for even an artist, how vulnerable we are to share who we are. If there are opportunities in different mediums, different languages, different ways that I can share and communicate, I think those are the challenges for myself. But the challenge is to really be aware and defining who I can be, and hopefully what others can be. And for students, I want to allow that to really grow naturally and let it find its way. Everyone's going to find their own ways.
What are some of the things you might do to help create an environment that they feel safe to?
For life drawing, for example, I will ask them to think about the model's perspective. And so one of their homeworks was hold a pose for 20 minutes. Pause. And hopefully there's this 20 minutes of like really contemplative stillness, physical stillness. Your mind is going to be moving. I mean, when they're drawing, their mind is moving, their bodies are moving, their hands are moving, their eyes are moving. But imagine in the perspective of the model. I mean, their mind is moving, but it's also very still. So yeah, their homework was to be also the subject as well as the artist. But I also encourage them to be their own professor, be your own teacher. So I think for me, from the years of teaching, is that I do see students willing to like fail, and that's okay. It's okay to succeed. Succeeding is also failing. We talked about earlier, like they're just drawing what they think they see, and sometimes they're making it up, and they actually are really good drawings. They're really successful at it. And so then where is the learning? The learnings are going to be small increments of learning. Whereas if you were to fail, then there's a lot of growth. The question I would ask you is like, is there a definition for vulnerability? You've gone through many interviews and have conversed, and hopefully a lot was learned too, just as as a professor too would learn a lot from their students, and how that definition could maybe has shifted and changed through this process of going from your first podcast to today.
I think that my conception of what vulnerability means has definitely changed from when I first started. So I had an idea in my head about, well, I think technically the dictionary definition is something like, I'm willing to be hurt. Like, there's a negative connotation to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you're at risk of being hurt, not willing even. You're at risk. You're not strong. You're weak. And it's like you don't have a shell. So you're like the little shrimp without the shell. And somebody can just come along because you're vulnerable. And there's a lot in the literature around vulnerable populations. So the elderly are more vulnerable. Young children
right.
They can't protect themselves. They need protection from others. So that's where I started. And I was mostly talking about, like, what does it take to risk being hurt? Why is it that some people do take those risks? They go and look for these opportunities. But I think where it has evolved now, it's not a weakness, it's not a strength, it's just the openness. And I think it's actually, so what you said about being open to seeing, or to see, to not see without intention, I would want to then sort of like enlarge a bit the idea of vulnerability as something around being open, but without intention. So you're open to input coming, insights from outside, to feedback. Because the other thing that makes me a little bit crazy right now is people will say, you know who you are. Don't let other people influence who you think you are. Don't let other people influence what you do. And I'm like, but I don't really like that. Like, it's somewhere in the middle, because if I'm not open to feedback, do I think I can just navel gaze and figure out who I am and what I want to be doing? Like, no, I want to learn from outside as much as I want to learn from. I think there's a lot we're not open to inside ourselves.
Right.
So I love sight as it just is the dominant, sense metaphor of our, the Western world, I guess, anyway. But being open to seeing without intention, things that are happening out there, things that are happening in here. And what do I want to do with that?
Yeah.
Maybe not. But maybe I want to create something.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are the being aware and being able to be vulnerable, like not knowing where you are definitively on what you're seeing. That takes being thoughtful and taking time to really think about others. Being vulnerable to think of others is also, that's a challenge. I could think about myself, sure, but thinking about others, that's really important.
Thank you, Chris, so much. I really appreciate just a chance to speak with you and learn from you.
Thank you again, too, for inviting me to share and have this space, a safe space, Sarah. I really appreciate that. I was able to open up and be vulnerable, which is, for me, it's a good thing. It's a growth for me. So I really appreciate that.